Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming to the first of 6 events for the Soil Health and Community Resilience Stories from the North series. This 2021 series is our 3rd annual soil series. Tonight's event is called Connections Between Soil, Food, Climate, and Resilience, and it features Grace Gershuny, Stacey Doll, Kenya Lazuli, and Migrant Justice. I'm Lauren Weston, tonight's facilitator and one of the organizers of this series. I'd like to first thank the other members of the organizing team, including Grace Gershuny, Becky Colpitts, Melissa Larita Cole, Avi Bauer, and Kat Buxton. I would also like to thank all of you who are here this evening or watching the recording in the future. Thanks to those of you who filled out the survey that we sent around for the community to gather input on this series. Your responses, priorities, and resources informed every step of the planning process, and we hope that you enjoy this series that you all helped to design. I would also like to thank all of our incredible partners who have made this series possible. The 45+ organizations and businesses that you see on the bottom and side of your screen have helped us fundraise for our speakers, spread the word about these events, and shared countless resources with us, and we are excited to share them with you. We'd also like to give a special shout out to the Cooperative Education Fund, the Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition, and the Littleton Food Co-op. To learn more about all of the partners and to take a look at all of the resources gathered from partners and through the pre-event planning survey, please visit our website for the series. I will put that into the chat now. We would like you all to know that we are recording tonight's event. Additionally, we ask that you keep yourself muted and your video off until the Q&A portion of tonight's event. Our team will be doing our best to keep disruptions to a minimum, and we will be disabling everyone's ability to unmute yourself for the beginning of the event. We will also be turning your videos off for the beginning of the event. We suggest that you set your current Zoom view to gallery view by clicking the word view in the top right corner of your screen and selecting gallery. You'll be able to see all of the panelists at the same time if you are in that view. You should also have a button at the bottom of your screen called Live Transcript. If you click the up arrow next to those words, you should be able to turn on or off an auto-generated live feed of subtitles of tonight's discussions. We apologize in advance if that transcription service captures any of the words incorrectly. If you have any questions for us, please submit them through the Zoom chat box. There we go. We would like to open this event with a land acknowledgement. This land acknowledgement for what is referred to by some as the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont and the North Country of New Hampshire has been shared with us and others by Chief Don Stevens of the Nulhegan Band of the Cossack Abenaki Nation. Many of us are on the land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among Indigenous peoples for thousands of years and is home to the Western Abenaki people. The team organizing this event today honors, recognizes, and respects these peoples, especially the Abenaki, as the traditional stewards of the lands and waters on which we gather today. In that spirit, today we will begin by acknowledging that we are guests in this land. We need to respect and help protect the lands within our use. Additionally, we would like to take a few moments of silence to honor and respect the elders of the past and present who were and are stewards of this land. Thank you all. In making this series, we wanted to create a community for all to gather safely. We created a list of community values and guidelines that are being shown on your screen now. In this space, we agree to respect and recognize all voices, lived experiences, perspectives, and worldviews. We seek to create a safe space for learning and sharing, and we ask that we all use inclusive and respectful language. Violations of these values and guidelines will lead to removal from the event by our team this evening. Thank you for understanding. With those in mind, let's get to know each other. As you feel comfortable, please introduce yourself in the chat box with your name, where you're participating from tonight, and a response to the question, what do soil health and community resilience have in common? That should get us rolling for an exciting evening. While you're all introducing yourself, I'll tell you about tonight's survey and raffle. We do have a post-event survey that shouldn't take you more than 3 minutes to complete and will be sent out with the recording of tonight's event via Eventbrite. So make sure that you have registered on Eventbrite. You shouldn't have been able to join without the Zoom link that was being sent out from Eventbrite as well. If you fill out that survey within 1 week of tonight's event, you will be entered into our raffle for prizes. And so this week we have 3 separate prizes. The first is the book Organic Revolutionary by our very own Grace Gershuny. The second is Me and White Supremacy, Combat Racism, Change the World, and Become a Good Ancestor by Layla Saad. And Compost and Worm Castings from Black Dirt Farm. In addition, for all participants, Chelsea Green Publishing has generously offered a 35% off discount code for their books and more from their website, chelseagreen.com. The code is PWEB35. It is on your screen right now as well, and it's good for all participants here tonight and watching the recording this spring. Thank you, Chelsea Green. With that, I am very excited to introduce our speakers this evening. We will be hearing stories from Grace Gershuny, author, educator, organic consultant, organizer for this series, and Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition board member. We will be hearing stories from Stacey Doll, executive director of Root to Rise and the community resiliency planner at the North Country Council Regional Planning Commission and Economic Development District. And we will be hearing stories from Kenya Lazuli, the co-founder of Radical Imagination, whose current focus is on the Everytown Project. We will also have a short recorded feature from Marita Canedo and Madeline Sharrow of Migrant Justice that we will show prior to opening the event up to Q&A for the majority of the second half of our time together tonight. To learn more about these speakers and their projects, in addition to resources they've shared that have informed their own journeys, please visit our website and scroll down the page to the section for Event 1. With that, I am very excited to turn it over to Grace Gershuny, who is going to open the evening. I will stop sharing my screen, Grace.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you, all of you amazing people, for showing up. I'm really a bit gobsmacked right now at the number of people and how many old friends are there in the list that I've scanned. So I'm going to start out with a little bit of my history and or my story, but I'm really going to be talking more about the science of soils and an overview of what we're really doing for this whole series. So this will be a little bit less story, and I'm going to share my screen. That's my book, and the reason, one of the major motivations for me to be getting it out there and trying to push it on people is that it's really gets at the imperative of working with soil to slow and in fact reverse climate change. And that's one of my big issues and motivations. And it's also very much about all of the connections and the holistic meaning of what you get when you take care of soil, as well as a whole bunch of other stuff about what I've done with my life, including writing the National Organic Program. And that was a huge thing, which I won't even mention anymore. So this is my my representation of the holistic nature of what we're going through right now. This was showing the fact that all of these things are related to how we manage land, the refugee crisis, the scarcity conflicts, climate change, very much so, extinctions, and we might add, there's a little disease up there. Yeah, the pandemic is also related to all of these things. So you can't really untangle them. They're all related, and that's what we're going to be showing in the rest of this series. We're going to be really bringing in different aspects of what we can do as a community, as a culture, in order to really begin to address these issues, and how we grow food and how we manage land is really at the center of it, as well as, of course, our economic system and our political system and so on and so forth. They're all related. And one quote I'll share with you is from a speaker who named Sally Calhoun, who was spoke at the E.F. Schumacher Society, or the Center Society for New Economy. And what she was talking about was what they got at when they were changing their land management practices to holistic management, and went about asking the root cause of the problem. And really what she said is, we usually determine that the root cause is cultural. The root cause is disconnection between humans and natural systems. And all of that, the cascading effects, the inequities, the pollutions, the extractive economies, etc. So I will move along to really talking about soil, and I'm not going to give a comprehensive explanation or tutorial, but what I'm going to do is just try to give you a sense of some of the newer and more exciting information that I've been learning in the last few years as a soil freak. I certainly didn't know it all, but I considered myself somewhat of an expert, but I don't really consider myself an expert anymore. I think a lot of others and younger people have surpassed me, but we will be also, I want to point out, looking at a range of practical solutions and practical methods that people are using in the Northeast Kingdom and in the North Country of New Hampshire, and in fact, all over the world, to support the health of the soil and to create the conditions for healthy soil. And this slide comes from our dear friend and collaborator, Kat Buxton, who is one of the people I've been learning from in the last few years. And this is just a few tidbits of information about what is what healthy soil does for our ecosystem, and in particular the idea that it draws down carbon, and you know, the whole thing is a microcosm of our society. There's a lot of diversity needed in order to have health. There are scores and scores of workers who are unseen and unknown, but they are what make soil healthy. And I have reviewed some of the gems of wisdom, and one of them that I really liked came from Walter Jena, the Australian hydrologist and soil ecologist who we've all been learning a great deal from. And he likened the structure of the soil created by all of these organisms to a cathedral. And he suggested that it is the structure, the mycelia and the aggregates and the organic matter and the minerals that are. So the recording is done. So this starts with photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is the source of food for the billions of organisms that live in for the whole earth, for all of our food. And it provides the food through a liquid carbon pathway in the root system that is in symbiosis with fungi, and that exudes, the plant roots exude the carbon, the fungi who can't photosynthesize take it up, and they also bring needed nutrients as well as water to plants, even if there isn't any water right in the immediate environment. And oops, sorry. So the next slide is just an illustration of the mycorrhizal fungi, which are really the most important, if there can be said to be a most important group of organisms, all working through a mutualism in which different players have different roles that are really important, and that need to be working together. More cool pictures. So the principles of maintaining soil health are kind of our mantra. Living roots in the ground. The more living roots are in the ground, the healthier your soil will be. Maximize diversity, above ground and below ground. Different plants and different roots promote different organisms that all help. Minimize disturbance. Disturbance meaning tillage, but also chemical disturbance. And I think that that's an important thing to remember. Pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, all those biocides. Eliminate or minimize bare soil. Maintain animals in contact with the soil, and let the water slow and sink instead of running off. And Kat does a really cool demonstration of bread and flour that, if you haven't seen it, go look at last year's recordings, and each session starts with Kat's demonstration. So I want to just talk a little bit about water, because if we were to stop emitting carbon dioxide tomorrow, and if we were to even continue building healthy soil at a fast clip, what we would need to do immediately is to cool the planet, is to bring down the temperature to allow green plants to be able to grow. Because right now, climate change and the increased warming of the planet is making it inhospitable for green plants to even be able to grow. So beyond carbon, healthy soil helps us cool the planet through the water cycle. And this is just a, off the off the web graphic about the water cycle. And the thing that really is important to remember is that just having the soil covered with green brings the temperature down. You can certainly experience this for yourselves. And moreover, even with the amount of water vapor in the air that is forming what's called a haze that will not fall as rain without something to seed the raindrops. And the raindrops are seeded by only certain things, including some minerals and salts, but most rain is seeded by bacteria that are released from the leaves of green plants and trees in particular. And trees are amazing. So I will not go much more into the technicalities. I know I've gone over. Soil is important for human health. This is from Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN. Just a small indication of what healthy soil does for us as humans, as healthy humans, and keeping us healthy. And I think that, you know, this is one of my favorite photos. That health also is stimulated by contact with the soil. And I certainly feel that myself, that being in touch with the soil, being in touch with green plants and trees and the outdoors is important for our physical health. So, in conclusion, I will hand it over to Stacey Doll, who's going to talk more about community resilience, if I understand it, and that's a big piece of what we're talking about here. And thank you all for listening. I will stop sharing now.
Great. Thanks, Grace. Thank you for passing it along and for setting a really good foundation for our conversation tonight. I'm going to share my screen. I have just a few slides to share with you this evening. So one of my favorite quotes, and I share this quite a bit when I'm teaching permaculture classes, comes from Wendell Berry. And he says that soil is the great connector. You know, it's the destination, it's the restorer, it's the resurrector. And for me, in this quote, it reminds me of the importance that soil is that full cycle of life, the birth, the life, the death, and the rebirth cycle. And that without proper care for it, we have no community. And so without proper care for it, we have no life. Our life is intimately connected with soil. And so this is such an important conversation to be having tonight. And I think my relationship with soil started at a very young age when I would find myself spending hours outside playing in the dirt, as I used to call it as a kid, or in the mud, you know, making mud cakes for my friends and my family and playing down by the creek and just coming home every evening covered in soil. And so that was my first relationship, not really understanding all the science behind it that I learned later in life. But there was something very freeing that happened. You couldn't really put words to what it was like to play in the soil. And what's interesting is at almost 47 years old, I still feel like a kid every time I'm playing in the soil. And then that relationship was further developed for me in my childhood because I grew up outside of Washington, D.C. with two parents that work for the Environmental Protection Agency. So I would come home covered in soil and creek water from being with my friends outside and listen to my parents use really big words around public policy and the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act, and not quite understanding what they were talking about, but I think that was building the soil within me to get more and more curious about how it is that places get developed, how it is that humans live together in spaces. How do we make the decisions that we make and who makes them for how we live our lives? And of course, this image here of this subdivision is very representative of where I grew up. A very much planned bedroom community outside of Washington, D.C., with a little, carpool parking lot at the entrance, and everyone would go into D.C. and everyone would come back. And right on the fringes of those subdivisions was that little teeny sliver of wild land that was left where the soil wasn't compacted. And that's where we played. So this sort of kind of further developed for me. And as I started to think about, like, where am I going to go to school? What is it that I'm going to study? What do I want to be when I grew up? I found myself going deeper and deeper into community planning, environmental planning, and sustainability planning. And probably, if I were to add up the years, I think I spent a good 20 years of my life as a community and regional planner. And then that transitioned over the last 10 years to getting more intentionally focused on humans' relationships to soil and the environment. And that, as Wendell Berry says, that interconnection, that play between the health of the soil and the health of us as humans. And so really my work over the last 10 years has been honing in from that broad-based, how do we design places? How do we decide where homes and where businesses are going to be, all the way down to how do we work in community? How do we work in relationship to each other? How do we learn more from the environment, just as much as we learn from each other? So some of the images here depict, the gardens in my backyard, which were very manicured at first, and now are very wild, very polycultures and perennial plants as well as annual plants, and really letting there be wild edges, and the importance of building soil and bringing in organic matter year after year, and looking at the things that we would call waste and seeing them now as a resource to building more soil. And spending time like weaving together conversations and stories and community with people, realizing that we all have something to add to our social soil composition. And I've also spent some time, especially over the last year or two, through some grants that we had, working with kids and teaching them about soil, and they're looking at me going, do you have gloves? I don't want to get my hands dirty. And so I just immerse my hands deep, deep in the soil. And I'm like, come on, get dirty with me. And we play in the dirt. We talk about it. We talk about, pick it up. Do you know that there's more life in your hand than there are people on the planet? And kids are fascinated by this information. So my relationship with soil has continued to deepen. And the two really quick projects and organizations that I work for that I want to tell you about, and then happy to go further in our Q&A, is that about 3 years ago, I helped found a nonprofit organization in the North Country of New Hampshire called Root to Rise. And our mission is planting seeds and growing permaculture everywhere with everyone. As a permaculture educator, I saw a gap that those that were learning these principles and practices were only those that had the resources to do so. And yet at the same time, I was seeing gaps and needs in my community where folks didn't have access to healthy food, healthy soil, or even the training and education to shift that situation for themselves. So what Root to Rise does is we come in and work with community partners and organizations throughout the region and say, we can teach permaculture right here, out of the classroom and into the world. Anyone who wants to learn is welcome to come. We're going to put our hands in the soil together and not only create a vibrant garden full of food and pollinator plants, but we're also going to build our soil and our mycelium together. We we like to say that our organization is a teach a person to fish organization. It's more about empowering those that aren't usually part of the conversation and making those spaces more accessible to everyone. Now, recently, I've transitioned into a position still working for Root to Rise, but also had the opportunity to go back to North Country Council Regional Planning Commission, where we are leading right now an effort to kind of recover our economy from COVID-19 and talk about what does a more resilient future look like for the North Country. And what I'm doing is I'm taking a lot of those ecological practices and philosophies, the things that we learn from building soil and building connections in nature, and saying, well, what does that look like in our economy? Aren't we the ecosystem? How is each sector of the economy being affected right now? And then where are those intersection points? Where is it where the mycelium crosses over, that there might be very specific projects or solutions that help all sectors of the economy? How do we bring people together who might not have been part of economic development planning in the past, but boy, are they important to our economy and to our region. So that planning process is underway and will go through the summer of next year, and we hope even beyond that. But that's a little bit about what I do. And again, I'm happy to share more when we have time during Q&A, but I want to give some time for my new friend Kenya to also introduce herself and the amazing work that she's doing. So I'm going to stop sharing and pass it over to Kenya.
Thank you, Stacey. Thank you, Grace. Also, this was the evolution of this conversation is just right. It was like the perfect lead-in for me. So thank you. My name's Kenya Lazuli. I live in Corinth, Vermont, and I'm from here. I grew up here and left for 25 years, and then came back to have my baby at home. She is now 6, so that it's been a while. So the reason I'm here today is to talk about Everytown, which is a project that that sort of came about like at the beginning of COVID, because I usually run an arts residency out of my home and host artists during the summer months and feed them from my garden. And because we weren't allowed to gather this year, or this past year in 2020, instead I started looking into like land access work, because one of my residents, so prior to 2020, I'd been hosting seven artists at a time, 3 sessions a year. And I would give scholarships for people of color who wanted to come and be in nature and be, here in Vermont with us. And one of those residents last year contacted me and told me the story about how she had been in the woods here. She's from the border of Texas and Mexico, and most of her family lives in Mexico. And she was doing a lot of border crossing. And so like being in nature was like very triggering and scary for her. And she called me at the beginning of 2020 and said, I wanted you to know that when I was in the woods at your house, I had a moment where I was like collecting these things, like pine cones and things for a project. And she said, and I had this moment where I realized I'm not afraid in the woods here because I'm at Kenya's house. And that, like, I'm gonna cry talking about it, but that like it really hit home for me, because it was very clear in the work that I was doing that the majority of the people that could afford to take time off and come here and access this space were wealthy white people. And with what happened with George Floyd this past summer and Breonna Taylor, and it's just like all of the things that had been happening in our world so publicly this past year, sort of, I had this moment where I was like, I can't do this work anymore in the way that I do it. And so I sort of shifted gears, and I now teamed up with 2 other women of color to create Radical Imagination. And so because we couldn't host people and just do the arts residency, the 3 of us started working together on like skill shares, like outdoor events, and like how to support people during a pandemic, but also just like support Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color who don't otherwise have access to nature or like the outdoors in the way that I do because I live here. Support them in connecting. So that has sort of like taken up a lot of our energy, but then also I started to feel more strongly about how I live here. I grew up here. I feel comfortable here. That's not the case for a lot of people of color when they come to Vermont. or any rural space. And so I started this work called Every Town. I was on a walk with the woman who owns the house I live in. And I said, wouldn't it be cool if there was, you know, like land in every town in the state that was like reserved for people of color to like come and feel safe and have community? And she said, yeah, that would be cool. And so I started calling people and emailing people and just like sort of asking lots of questions about like how we could make this happen. And one of those people was my co-conspirator, Mindy. I applied for a grant through her organization and I got the grant, but she also afterwards was like, let's work to get together on this and make it happen. So where Every Town is right now is there's two branches almost. So we're collaborating with the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, and they will hold land in trust permanently for BIPOC access and stewardship. And what that looks like for us is not only like finding land stewards or matching people with properties, but it also looks like creating safe space in these communities before these people come and making sure that like the neighbors surrounding these properties are going to act as like a mutual aid network for these communities. So there will be, you know, there will be a network of land stewards throughout the state. There will be a network of neighbors throughout the state, and they can support each other and themselves, you know, like as an overlapping network of resources. Let's see. So since Every Town started, and since Mindy and I started working together and talking more about it, we also started talking with legislator Brian Sheena, Representative Brian Sheena, and he was already working on a piece of legislation to support land access for BIPOC in Vermont. And so we teamed up, and that legislation is like about to be turned in tomorrow. We've been working super hard on it. It's not perfect, but it's a step in the right direction. And, you know, like everything, like this takes time, it's process. This is a step, it's not the first step. There's a lot of other people doing a lot of amazing work. But it's a step that we're involved in and that we're gonna help move forward if we can. So that's sort of like the overview of these projects and like how I got here. The last thing I wanna say is that like, there are already, like we're like playing catch up with this whole process. As soon as like we started talking about it with people, they gained a lot of interest and people wanted to be involved. So we don't have like a website, like a shiny website to show you right now, like, you know, like any of these things that like I would have loved to bring slides, but my slides aren't ready, you know, because we're playing catch up. But at the same time, I will tell you that another thing that's like very exciting about this whole process is that we already have 3 properties being donated. We already have like 2 land stewards set up for like 2 of the properties, and one of them, they're like, the landowner is reaching out to their community to see who in their community is in need of land and in need of space. So it's happening. It's a lot of work and a long process. And if people want to get involved, I'll put our email address in the chat, because that's like honestly the easiest way to get in touch with us right now. But yeah, but so I think that's like my like big summary. I started reading questions in the chat and that was like not a good idea because I got distracted, but thank you all for listening and like coming and paying attention. And like, I think that it's like, this is like was the perfect transition from soil to community to the actual people on the soil who like have been removed from the soil or removed from their own soil. So it's like, it's sort of like came full circle, and like I'm really excited to be a part of this. So thank you, and I'll pass it back to you, Lauren.
Thank you, Kenya, and thanks to all of our incredible speakers. I completely agree, it worked out beautifully. I would like to now share a video clip that was sent to us from Migrant Justice about the Milk with Dignity program. They aren't in person with us tonight, but they did prepare a little 10-minute video clip for us to all learn more about the projects that they are involved with. So I will share my screen.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for having us. My name is Madeline Chero. I'm part of the Migrant Justice team. Pass it to my colleague.
Hi, my name is Marita. I'm also part of the Migrant Justice team. Thank you for giving us the space.
So we're going to be talking today, Marita and I are going to be sharing about a little bit about Migrant Justice, and specifically talking more about the Milk with Dignity campaign and how to get involved. So Migrant Justice is a grassroots farm worker founded and farm worker led organization that is based in the immigrant farm worker community in the dairy industry in Vermont. Migrant Justice works to build the voice, capacity, and power of the immigrant farm worker community and also engage allies to advance human rights and economic justice. So to talk a little bit more about the context for immigrant workers on dairy farms in Vermont, it's important to know that farm workers from Mexico and Central America are working to sustain the dairy industry in Vermont, as well as around the country and other food systems and other industries. Migrant Justice conducted 2 extensive surveys of working conditions on farms and found that wages in many cases are incredibly low. Hours are very, very long, in some cases even up to like 16 hours a day or longer. And housing, which is almost always provided on the farm, housing conditions can be really deplorable and undignified. Also, the farming in general and the dairy industry is it's a dangerous industry, and so we see a lot of workplace injuries and a general lack of protection for workers. And so we're just going to talk a lot about how the community is organizing to face these issues.
So that's why, the community created the Milk Unity program. We call the New Day in the dairy industry because it solves the problem at its root and includes the entire supply chain. How it works, Migrant Justice signs a legally binding agreement with the corporation for them to take responsibility for the conditions in their supply chain. The corporations commit to buy from farms in the program and pay them a premium. This premium that the farms receive has to go in comply with a code of conduct that has been written by workers themselves. This code has standards for wages, hours of rest, housing, health and safety, and creates protections against retaliation, harassment, discrimination. It really represents the community definition of dignified work. But these standards need to be meaningful and need to be known by everybody. That's why Migrant Justice conducts education sessions with everybody at the farm. And this brings power to the workers to defend their rights at the front line. Also, to ensure that the farm comply with the code, there is the Milk Dignity Standards Council, which is an independent organization with investigators that conduct audits and have a 24/7 support line for everybody at the farm. It's a resource for the farm for better communication and comply. If the farm doesn't comply with the code, the Milk Dignity Standards Council can suspend the farm, which will lose the premium and the ability to sell the companies in the program. And that's something we don't want. So after creating this program, we launched a campaign, and for 3 years, we were asking publicly to Ben & Jerry's to join the program. And at the beginning, they didn't accept because it was a model that they weren't familiar with. And we had many, many actions, including a 13-mile march to their factory, speaking tours, and they finally signed on October 3rd, 2017, and it was a historic moment. For the first time in history, a corporation sat across the table and signed an agreement with dairy workers. The implementation went in 100% of the Northeast supply chain. It covers around 250 workers, which means 20% of the industry in Vermont, plus some farms in New York. As I said, Migrant Justice is giving the education session. The farms have been monitored by the Standards Council, and hundreds of thousands of dollars have flown directly from Ben & Jerry's to the workers' pockets in the form of raises, bonuses, paid vacations, and much more. We can say that the new day has arrived in Ben & Jerry's supply chain.
So Mritu was talking about the incredible success of the Milk with Dignity program. And so farm workers have been also planning and strategizing how to expand it to cover more farms. And so this is a picture of a rally in front of the supermarket Hannaford. which is a local supermarket chain with almost 200 stores around the Northeast. And so that makes them a really significant buyer of dairy in the region. Farm workers first approached the Hannaford supermarket in the summer of 2019 to ask them to sit down at the table and talk about milk with dignity and why it's important. And they received no response. So in the fall of 2019, farm workers decided to launch a public campaign calling on the Hannaford supermarket to join Milk with Dignity. Since that day, in the fall of 2019, there have been many different actions. This is a picture from a march to one of the Vermont Hannaford supermarkets. There was a coordinated day of action where farm workers and allies, not only across Vermont, but across the whole Northeast region, held rallies at their local Hannaford stores. There's been petitions, support from national organizations. And then this spring, the pandemic hit, and that has really impacted how we've been able to organize. And while we know that the COVID-19 pandemic is impacting food workers all throughout the food chain, we're seeing companies like Hannaford having their profits only increase during this crisis. And so while Hannaford continues to ignore the calls of farm workers, Migrant Justice has been organizing. This is a picture from a mass call-in day of action that we held in the summer last year. We've been doing virtual presentations like this one around the Northeast and also around the country to build support for the campaign, and continuing to hold socially distanced small rallies while we wait for the conditions with the pandemic to allow us to continue to organize. So I'm going to pass it back to Marika.
Thank you, Madeleine. So yeah, we implemented this program regardless of COVID, it's functioning. And on October 3rd, 2020, it was the 3rd year anniversary of Ben & Jerry's joining the program and 1 year of the campaign for expansion with Hannaford. So we released the biennial 2020 Milk with Dignity report in a press conference. This report documents the success and impact of the program during the beginning. And it's very important, you know, we can share the link. It shows really how things are changing in the farm level. And you can see the testimonies and you can see data and really understand how this is impacting the community. At the same time of the day of the release, we have a National Day of Action. 25 different delegations in Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Maine, and New York made a trip to their local Hannaford to deliver a copy of the report and called on the store to join Milk with Dignity. And supporters from afar also helped boost the Milk with Dignity report release on social media. You can see here a picture of the workers campaigning as well. And this has been ongoing online, commenting on Hannaford's Facebook webpage. You can see that the workers are milking the cows, bringing the milk to the supermarket and also buying it. They are consumers. They are reading the report. They are sharing with their family members. And it's really important that they are really leading this campaign. And we invite you to be part of this and support all the efforts for the community to go to the Northeast region and really bring the new day for every farm.
So thank you so much. Here's a list of Migrant Justice social media handles. Please get involved. We'll be sharing a copy of the Milk with Dignity report, which Marita mentioned, as well as a Milk with Dignity action toolkit, which goes into more detail about how to get organized, how to get involved, and what you can do to take action to support farm workers. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Hello again, everyone. I would like to add as well that Migrant Justice is holding an event on this Saturday in St. Albans. If anyone is interested, please do get involved with them. The links for their resource report, it went into the chat, and they're also on our website as well. If you have any questions for Migrant Justice as well, please put them in the chat, and I will make sure that the messages get passed along to those two lovely speakers, Marita and Madeline. So please still ask questions of them, even though they are not here with us tonight. We are at the stage of the evening now for some question and answer with our lovely panelists. I would also like to thank Avi, who has been collecting all of the questions in the chat and is sending them to me separately. So thank you. I am going to start with a question, or I'm going to ask one of the question askers to unmute themselves and to join the conversation and to ask one of their questions. Sagar Sa, I'm going to ask you to unmute, and hopefully that you can come on screen and ask your question.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity and all the talks from the eloquent speakers. My question was, firstly, with regards to phytoremediation and photosynthesis. So I'm not a farmer, but I've been doing a lot of research the last few years in the benefits of industrial hemp. And I do know there's some bills coming out because there is a massive push for legalization, but I don't really know if those benefits are going to be good or not. But I just wanted to know if there is much research in not just how to do the soil organically as you are purporting, but also how to enhance it further by growing cannabis or hemp, as you want to call it, in rotation with other crops in rotation throughout the year, because it is, as I understand, a very big nitrogen fixer. And yeah, there's so many things to talk about it. So I just wanted to know about that. And also just one last thing is, what is it that we can learn all around the world from the farmer process in India? Because that is very much about not just organic, but also fighting for the small farmers wherever they are in the world. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Would any of our panelists like to take a first stab at this? Grace, go ahead, Grace.
Okay, well, I actually am not aware of any information about hemp being a nitrogen fixer. It is definitely not a legume, which is the class of plants that fixes nitrogen, but it is a very hardy plant and creates a lot of biomass and a lot of root mass, which is going to help the soil. I think that harvesting it is a question that I would have, and cultivating it to the extent that it disturbs the soil and requires tillage and gets dug up at the end of the harvest season. So those are questions I would have about hemp cultivation. I know it shouldn't be necessary to actually pull it up. I'm sure it makes a great rotation crop. So there are so many crops that are both soil improving and marketable that it is that it really makes a lot of sense to have those crops as alternating crops. And I certainly don't claim to know much more than that about hemp per se. But the farmer protests in India, yeah, I've just actually been working with my social ecology colleagues. I'm also on the board and the faculty of the Institute for Social Ecology, want to give a shout out to them as a radical political organization that that educates people about things like protest movements against capitalism, which is basically what the farmer protests in India are. And it's unbelievable how little attention has been given. I mean, this is like millions and millions of people, general strikes, all on account of government proposals to give corporations more authority to buy up farmland, which, as I understand it, is not permitted. That corporate ownership of farmland isn't permitted in India, and they want to make it permissible for the corporations to buy up the farmland. So, I mean, it's outrageous. It's going on all over the world, and it's one of the major causes of the mass extinctions, and in fact, the pandemic could be linked to corporate buyout of tropical rainforests to plant palm oil plantations. So I hope that you will let people know about it, look into it, and keep us posted about it.
Thank you, Grace. Stacey or Kenya, would you like to add anything?
I think the only thing I'll add, and I think that this was said, but thinking about hemp and cannabis as, do they have a good relationship with helping us build healthy soil? I think it gets to this point of integration too of other crops. I mean, regardless of what crop it is, steering away from the more monoculture, having one crop that takes the same sort of nutrients out and replanting that time and time again is going to have an impact on the soil. But I know of a farmer in Vermont who was working with berms and swales, so trying to capture the water in between the berms, and he'd have a row of hemp, and then he'd have a row of sea berries, and then he'd have a row of something else, and then he would repeat it. And he was trying to see what sort of companion plantings he could use in a field setting, and work with the contours of the land with berms and swales to capture the water in between. So I think in that respect, yes, as with other plants, it could really help build the soil, but I think it has to be looked at and designed as a whole system. Just one particular plant itself is not going to do all of the work. It has to be designed as an ecosystem. And then, yes, I'll echo what Grace is saying. We're seeing this kind of play out across the globe right now. If anything, the pandemic has shined a bright light on injustices everywhere, and we're all in this together. So what we're seeing play out on other places in other countries, we need to be very vigilant about what does that look like and how does that transpire here. I think some of the work that we heard that Migrant Justice is doing, the work that Kenya is doing with Everytown Lake, we need to get behind these movements and let it build from the grassroots up, and really have a strong case for making sure that inclusion and equity is a part of every conversation moving forward. But yeah, we need to keep our eyes open, because you're not going to find some of these really, really important stories that are unfolding in mainstream media. We have to look a little bit deeper and then ask, how can I show up? And then how can we learn from this to ensure that that doesn't happen here?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stacey, for building on that. Kenya, would you like to add something, or we can move on to the next question?
I think the experts handled that quite well.
Perfect. So moving on to the next question, I'm going to ask Charlie Costello. I'm going to unmute you if you want to come on and ask your question.
Gonna sleep. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Oh, nope. the wrong person. I will ask Charlie's question. How do you measure carbon in the soil? And I know this is an ongoing, evolving question. Who would like to go first?
I'll take a crack at it. It's tricky. Carbon is a very mutable element in the soil. It can take many different forms and it can be stored at different depths. Most carbon measurements are made only in the top 6 inches of soil, which, as we are learning, is not necessarily as far deep as it goes. When you have very deep-rooted crops like alfalfa, there is a good buildup of carbon and organic matter at much greater depths in the soil. The other thing is that carbon can change from day to day, and so that also kind of certainly by season to season it can change. So there are standard measurements for soil organic matter, which essentially burns the soil sample, and then the carbon that's left is measured, or not burns it, but dries it, so that you can see how much carbon was left. But there are beginning to be more sophisticated ways of measuring it. But essentially, soil organic matter is a proxy for carbon measurement. And there's just a lot of controversy about what is the most accurate and reliable way to measure it.
Thank you, Grace. I'll chime in as well. I know this is an ongoing discussion, at least in Vermont, in terms of the Payment for Ecosystem Services working group in the legislature that is starting up again in February. So please, if you're interested in that topic, make sure you check them out. We also have a couple more resources on the Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition website. Kenya or Stacey, anything to add to that question? All right. Stacey, I've got a question for you from Kat Buxton. Kat, I will come down and unmute you.
Okay, I was hoping you'd ask for me because I can't quite remember, but it was something about, I'm really intrigued by the work you're doing in community planning. I want to learn more, and I'll check out the links on the website that I'm sure are there to be able to do that. But I'm really interested in, have you or are you reaching out beyond your community and what in terms of regional work and cross-regional work? Because it sounds like you're bringing a framework that's really necessary to community planning.
Thank you, Kat. I'm going to sleep well tonight with that comment. Thank you very much. I am actually reaching out, and you know, to be honest, the funding that North Country Council received to do disaster relief planning, I mean, you know, most of us, none of us, we've never had a plan or a framework for how do we plan for recovery from a global pandemic. You know, this is new territory. But I'm coming back from, you know, spending the last 10 years working with permaculture and looking at ecological systems and thinking, well, doesn't that relate to our economy? Doesn't that relate to the way we organize our communities? What if we started to look at our communities as ecosystems instead of hierarchy structures? Aren't we a network of people? Don't we have other forms of capital beyond financial that are important, like social capital, intellectual capital, cultural capital? So I'm taking these principles and practices that I've been engaging in through a more traditional sort of environmental sustainable lens and seeing where they overlap and where they match up with community planning. And what I'm finding is there hasn't been any resistance so far. If anything, people are very happy to see that it's the more inclusive view of what economic development recovery could look like. And we are reaching across, one of the conversations we've been having is, North Country Council's region is the northern part of New Hampshire, but when we're talking about an economy, when we're talking about community and relationships, it doesn't like fall off when you hit the Connecticut River. And if anything, especially I live in Littleton, New Hampshire, we have a lot of connections with folks in the Northeast Kingdom. My husband works at Northern Vermont University. I've taught at Green Mountain College. So, we have a lot of relationships there. So I've been talking with the folks in the Northeast Kingdom Collaborative about what they did this last year for a recovery plan, learning from that effort. I'm also part of an effort here in the state of New Hampshire, a series that's been going on for 3 years around race and equity in New Hampshire. And there's 6 different sectors. One of them is economic development. And I've joined that team. So I'm working with folks in the southern part of the state who are talking about how do we start to find the pathway stories and develop metrics for economic development that are more inclusive and more equitable. And one of the things that we presented just this morning was the idea of using the 8 forms of capital, which I learned through permaculture that we're utilizing for this planning process as a framework for measuring more equity within economic development throughout the state of New Hampshire. So I'm definitely reaching out. I'm sharing, what I know and where I've come from and seeing where it's fit. But I think the time is really right now. We know now that those linear systems and hierarchy structures just aren't working. And we saw how they fell apart during a really, really challenging time. So folks are open to looking at things more like networks and thinking beyond just financial wealth as a way of recovering our economy. So, and we're going to keep reaching out and keep working together. I think there's a lot we can learn in the sort of rural region of Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, even into upstate New York, that we have similar conversations and similar things that we can learn and build off of with each other. So we'll continue to reach beyond just North Country Council's borders.
Thank you, Stacey. Kenya, I'm actually going to throw a similar question towards you in terms of if there are any models that you're building every town off of, and if you know of similar things going on in New Hampshire, and I guess also just a general overview. I'm sure some people on the call don't know much about the Nefolk Land Trust. If you want to just share a little bit about those different models as well.
Yeah, sure. I wish that I knew of other examples of people starting projects like this. I don't, unfortunately, I don't know really what's happening in New Hampshire. I was sort of actually glad to hear what Stacey was saying. But as far as the Everytown project, it was sort of like, it started just with like an idea. And so it just sort of like branched off from there. And like, I've tried to like connect with other people doing similar work around land access, but I haven't really found a good match. And I haven't found like a state doing this kind of work statewide. As far as Nefolk Land Trust, that's Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. They are the only land trust I know of on this coast, I guess, or really at all, that are holding land permanently for BIPOC, holding land in trust permanently for BIPOC. And that's part of that's definitely like a big part of their mission. But the other part of their mission, there's like, when they hold land, like the land has to be held regeneratively or stewarded regeneratively, no matter who is living on it. That's like part of the agreement for them to hold the land. That the soil and the mountains and the plants and like everything is cared for in a way that is healthy for the land. The land has rights in these relationships. They also, well, with regard to when they hold land for the Everytown project, it's sort of like there's a two-part relationship, I guess, with Nefolk. And one of those things, like they require not only that the land be held regeneratively, but also that the land stewards have a relationship with the indigenous community in the area where the land is. And that sort of like speaks to like their holistic approach to like land in general, and that it's not to be owned or like, yeah, like tended to, or, you know, lorded over. It's a part of the community. It's in relationship, and it's in relationship with the people who are original to that land. So, and there's much more I could say about them, but they're like, I highly recommend looking them up and getting in touch. And they also are interested, or they offer negotiation for equitable leases for people who don't want to donate land, but have land that they want to like share with the BIPOC community. So I highly recommend you like utilizing that service, because a lot of times those relationships can go really wrong. So I think that's like one of the most powerful things they're doing, is just sort of like helping people negotiate safely and equitably.
Thank you, Kenya. That I agree was a wonderful overview of those programs. So thank you so much. I'm going to ask Marsh Hudson Knapp to come on and ask your question. Scrolling down to the M's. There's so many of you on tonight. So great. Marsh, are you there?
I'm right here. I just unmuted myself.
Perfect.
So I'm involved in Climate Advocates Bennington 350 Vermont, and it's a part of 350. And we've been working on trying to sequester carbon by planting trees. And obviously the pandemic has made that really difficult. So we kind of got installed for a while. And then we got reading two books that have really gotten us excited. One is by a fellow whose last name is Wormsley, on lawns to meadows. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but Owen Wormsley is his name. And that led us to another person, Gabe Brown, who is a farmer out in North Dakota, who's written a book called Dirt to Soil. And a lot of the principles, Grace, that you lifted up are his operating principles for how he farms. But we've been thinking about trying to encourage people in our community to convert lawns to wildflower gardens. And then we got looking at Gabe's work and we thought, geez, you know, maybe we should be looking at converting lawns not just to wildflowers, but to principles like he's using on the farm. And so we're looking for guidance to try to convert what we're reading about in Gabe Brown's work into something that we might be able to do as a movement in the Bennington area.
Thank you so much for the question. I'm going to throw it to Grace first, just to respond a little bit.
So I heard some comments, but didn't quite get a question out of it. Can you restate it?
Sure. The question is in terms of how to adapt those principles to Vermont and New Hampshire and home gardening, and how to really encourage those principles to turn into practices on the land here, is my understanding.
Okay, well, that's what we're all about in the Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition. Basically, it's not a single strategy. It's multiple diverse strategies depending on the particular soil and geographic features and climate zone, which is shifting as we speak. We've had an incredibly mild winter so far, but so it's really a long-term educational project that we're trying to speed up a little bit because of the urgency of changing those practices. And you're going to see in the next rest of our sessions actual practical examples of people who are using those principles in their farming and other projects that they're doing. I'm particularly excited to have the concluding session is going to really be about the Abenaki approach, and we have a lot to learn from the indigenous folks who are becoming more and more active in preserving their cultural traditions, including how they care for land. And so that's about all I can tell you. It's a huge topic, how you can adapt these principles. And people like Gabe Brown are doing great things on large Midwestern tracts of land, or the plains, I believe, is actually where he is. But there are different strategies suited to different ecosystems. Agroforestry is a major one that really needs to be brought into the North Country and Vermont much more than it has been. So that's just one example.
Thank you, Grace, for that overview. Stacey or Kenya, anything to add?
I'll just add that we run into this a little bit with the work that we do for Root to Rise, if I'll put on my other hat for a moment. And, you know, in that scenario, what we're doing is we're working with organizations within the community who may not have access to food, or they might not have access to, you know, not even quite sure what to do, and how to, you know, start growing food, how to build garden spaces. And one of the things we run into right off the bat is, well, we need to get somebody to come in here to rip up this grass so that we can build a garden bed. And so there's an opportunity there for us as an educational organization to step in and go, actually, could you save, do you have cardboard boxes saved someplace? Or we'll go by the food co-op right down the street and get some cardboard boxes. And we teach about sheet mulching and the idea of taking things out of the waste stream to start to build that soil, and what happens when you rip up that grass to convert it into a garden space, all the micronutrients that you lose, all that biological life that you lose. And it really resonates with folks when you say, and isn't it kind of backbreaking work to rip up sod? You could just cover it with organic matter. And I think people like to see those examples. I here in my little house right in downtown Littleton, we've converted our entire front yard into perennial gardens and pollinator plants, and really thinking about what sort of plants can handle the salt and the sand from the road, since our home is really close to the road. And I've taken pictures. One of the things I tell folks that are doing these sort of grassroots work is document everything. Take pictures of before and after. Show laying down the cardboard. Show the appalled neighbors in the background looking at you going, why are you laying cardboard on your front lawn? But then show the beautiful organic matter, that sort of lasagna layering, and then the beauty afterwards, and how it transforms the space. So I think through education and just small demonstration projects, and I love the idea, one of the principles of permaculture is create no waste. Look at the things that are organic matters that we're tossing and getting rid of, or recycling, and thinking about how do we recycle that into soil and building more soil.
I do actually just want to add one thing. I'm sorry, Stacey, but I have to say it. So I hold a permaculture design certificate, and what I learned when I took my permaculture course was that the practices and principles of permaculture are a collection of indigenous practices from all over the world. And so it sort of like ties into what Grace was saying also. It's just like look to our ancestors, look to native practices, and there's a lot to be learned there. And it's, yeah, like that's a really important piece of permaculture that I think often is left out.
Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Grace.
I definitely agree with that, and have taught that idea in various contexts. And I have a slide that I had prepared that I had used in an earlier presentation for the Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition that kind of sums up my litany of ways that we can begin to change that paradigm and build the social mycelium. So I think this might be a good point to share my screen again and just show that one slide with its list, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Here, we're going to do that. And we're going to do that. And we're going to try to get this, yeah. So these are the different things that I've seen that are all part of the what we need to do to get more people practicing the soil health methods on whatever land they have access to, and increasing the access of all kinds of people and supporting our communities. And one of the things about the Northeast Kingdom and the North Country is that we're among the poorest parts of our respective states, and we have huge poverty issues, and we're also losing population, and that is a problem that has been, worried about. And so it would really be to everybody's benefit to welcome people who need access to land, who are eager to be able to produce their own food, and generate more of a community food sovereignty system, which is a really important idea, that we should be keeping the production of all of the necessities of life within our control as communities, and not be basing everything on these stupid global supply chains and industrial centralized systems. So that's my rant. And these are just some of the things that people are already doing, and we need to do more of and get the word out to everybody. That's it.
Thank you, Grace. I think that sums it up very nicely. I would like to give Kenya and Stacey also a minute or two to just have a final thought. Stacey, you can go first.
I was pointing at Kenya to have her go first, but I'll go. Yeah, I think there's so much to learn here about soil. And I guess one of the things that I will say is it's really easy to get very heady with this and, study soil and do soil tests and all. I'm a big believer of just learning by doing and playing and trying things out. Don't be afraid to try new things. I was talking about sheet mulching and building soil, and people, well, how many layers of what? I'm like, what do you have? Do you already have leaves in your yard? Do you already have grass clippings? Do you already have food? Just use what you have and build it from there, and study it through observation. Take notes, see what works well, what didn't work well. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Build off of the knowledge that has been here for forever, and then try new things, and don't be afraid to just play in the dirt again. Why not? Become a kid, have fun.
Yeah, I just actually really just want to say thank you to everyone, especially Stacey and Grace for sharing your wisdom and your experiences with soil and dirt. And I think that, like, if we all can just strive to be more welcoming and more spacious with regard to our own privilege and our own access to land, that's all really I would ask for, from my community. So thank you.
Thank you, Kenya, and thanks to everyone else as well. I am going to share one final slide for the evening, and then we will wrap up. So if you are interested in staying connected with the speakers and the other people on the call today, please fill out the survey that we are going to be sending you in a link from Eventbrite along with the post-event, with the recording of tonight. So you'll receive the recording of tonight as well as a post-event survey. On that survey, there'll be an option to engage in a Google group with these speakers, and it'll also be good for the entire series this spring. And it is reserved especially and only for this series. So please do join that. And make sure you check your promotions or spam folder on your email. I noticed I was getting my own notifications from Eventbrite in my spam folder, so make sure you double check those. And please do join us in 2 weeks. We will be having our second event of this 6-part series. It's called Partnering with Plants, and it will feature Michael and Nancy Phillips of Heartsong Farm and Lost Nation Orchard in Groveton, New Hampshire, Evan and Heidi from Small Axe Farm in Barnet, and Jan Enhoven from Carmatrolling in Barnet as well. Please do join us. We hope to continue to build on some of the information that we shared tonight and maybe answer some additional questions. We'll have lots of more perspectives, and we are looking forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. And I hope everyone has a great evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you to everybody. It's been lots of fun for me.